Thank you, Dean Evans, and congratulations. Martine, it is wonderful to be with you as we think about legacies. And this has been a rough year, and we've had two people who have left legacies and left us all recently, Congressman John Lewis and Justice Ginsburg. And I just wondered, when you think about those legacies in the digital world, which you're so familiar with and helped shape, what has inspired you and motivated you?
Thanks, Carla. It's great to be with you as well. What inspires me the most with legacies is summed up in the word gratitude. When a person passes, it's an opportunity for us to refresh our recollections and remind the greater population that may not be as familiar with the accomplishments of those individuals as to the tremendous efforts they made to create a better world for all of us. And I know that this is something that also resonated with Lyndon Johnson. He often referred to the soldiers who died in the fields of Flanders. World War I was concluded when he was a child. World War II, he was in the midst of that as a legislator and for a short time in battle. And he would talk about the people who came before us. They sacrificed so much. We owe it to them. We morally, ethically owe it to them to continue their mission and to make this a better world. And when I think of the contributions of Justice Ginsburg and the contributions of Congressman Lewis, the extraordinary fortitude and strength of character and persistence that they had to improve the lives of women, to improve the lives of Blacks and other disadvantaged minorities in the United States, I feel that I would be an ingrate, and that any of us would be an ingrate if we did not use our life and the abilities and resources we have to continue their mission and make the world as great a world as we possibly can make it.
And so the legacy really envelops appreciation, but also gives you some motivation to carry on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If somebody like Congressman Lewis could be, one of the key members of a group that led us from, outright disenfranchisement in blatant contravention of the Constitution over 100 years after it was made abundantly clear that everybody born in the United States had the right to vote. If he could lead us from that, absolute pit of civil rights to, if not like the highest mountain, at least to, a much higher vantage point where, most of the most egregious restrictions on voting rights have been pulled back, then what can we do to continue to build other aspects of what LBJ referred to as the Great Society? How can we say, oh, it's impossible to get rid of childhood hunger when Congressman Lewis took us from, having ridiculous poll taxes and other obstructions to even vote, having, so few rights at all, to at least having a modicum of the American dream? How can we complain about our inability to achieve, say, a parity of women on company corporate boards and a parity of women in the legislature? After 250 years just about, how come there has been no woman who has been president or vice president of a country that everybody here was born from a woman, and women have shouldered more than half of the burden of creating this country from the beginning? So it's from Justice Ginsburg's accomplishments, and it's from Congressman Lewis's accomplishments that first I feel a deep sense of gratitude, and that gratitude is what waters and nurtures my inspiration, and I believe all young people's inspirations, to make this a better world.
And what people might not realize, I just finished John Meacham's book about Congressman Lewis. He was a young student at the time, and when LBJ signed, and that took a lot of courage for him to push for the Voting Rights Act in '64. And he carried on the legacy of what had been, the work had been done. He worked with John Lewis. John Lewis was right there, and he gave him one of the pens. And so I wish you could talk a little bit more about how LBJ recognized you needed to work across the aisle, you needed to bring people together, respect young people, and he was the master of the Senate.
Well, I think also President Johnson showed us that there's no substitute for interacting one-on-one with other people. He was a people person. And whether it was going to the Hill or having people come to the White House, getting people in a corner and talking with them one-on-one, he was a people person. And it was a two-way exchange. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was, in my opinion, perhaps the greatest legislative accomplishment of a century. But then that followed with the Voting Rights Act, and that was only because he had spent enough time one-on-one with people like John Lewis and Martin Luther King that he realized when Martin Luther King said, we are not going to accept any substitute for a Voting Rights Act, Johnson was the consummate negotiator and bargainer. And he realized that the only way that he could balance the scales of that negotiation was, in fact, to get the Voting Rights Act passed in '65, even if it was over the blood and over the deaths of too many martyrs down in the South, Selma in particular. It did eventually get accomplished. But had Johnson put himself away in some ivory tower and just read reports, I don't think any of these changes in our society would have occurred. You get change in society when you meet with people one-on-one. One of my truest beliefs is that each person is like a library. There is so much information within each person. And it's sad when a leader passes, like Justice Ginsburg or Congressman Lewis, because it's like an entire library has gone up in flames. So how can we stop that library from going up in flames? We can stop it by absorbing into ourselves all of the life experiences and the teachings of a Justice Ginsburg and a Congressman Lewis. And that way their libraries expand our own personal libraries.
Well, you know that resonates with me, Martine.
As you do with me.
Because I'm sitting in right now the world's largest library with legacies all around. And I wondered what connected you to LBJ. I have a LBJ story too, so I want to hear yours first.
What connected me to LBJ was his quest to go to space. And this seemed to most people such a far out notion that we could actually launch things into space when nobody had before. He was already excited about space even when the first Sputnik went flying over his ranch in Texas. And he carried forward John F. Kennedy's legacy of before the end of this decade, we'll land a person on the moon and bring them safely back to Earth. So Johnson was somebody who thought big, but had his feet on the ground. And I remember when I received my bar mitzvah, which was in 1968, the rabbi said, Martine, you are somebody who has their head in the stars and their feet on the ground. And so to me, I was a little teeny tiny Lyndon Johnson because he always tried to be practical. He didn't just say, we're going to have a great society and did nothing about it. He passed hundreds of bills creating all the different building blocks of the Great Society. Medicare, today our company makes medicines available to tens of millions of people that it would be impossible, there wouldn't be an ecosystem for this without Medicare, without Medicaid. This all came from Johnson. And so it's his combination of thinking big, and being practical that bonded me to LBJ.
And even though I've read Robert Carroll and different biographies, it was Doris Kearns Goodwin who called him one of her guys with Lincoln, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and LBJ. She worked with him, and she is such a renowned historian, but she had her admiration for him and my admiration for her. She introduced me to those other parts of him too.
Yes, yeah, I love the biography by Doris Kearns Goodwin and also by Robert Dallek. He was a complicated individual, but anybody that amazing would be complicated. Roosevelt was complicated, Lincoln was complicated, Martin Luther King was complicated. Great people are by their nature complicated. But what inspires me about all of these great individuals is that they were able to balance the big picture with all the small steps you need to do to make it. And I believe that, young people coming out of the LBJ School today or other universities and academic programs, they should say to themselves, what is the biggest impact that I could practically have in this life? And then go for it. The mantra that I use in my company is to go big or go home. And that is to me an LBJ mantra, go big or go home. And we can all be inspired by that.
Well, you mentioned your company and the medical part. What has this pandemic taught us? Because the young people who are in the LBJ School now are going to they have a legacy that they will be carrying, being part of this and thinking about a future.
This pandemic has taught us that there are problems that are so large that they can only be solved at the largest of scales, which for a country would mean the national scale. Unfortunately, during the Reagan administration, there was beginning this notion that I'm here from the federal government to help you was like a bad thing. But for, my parents' generation who grew up during the Depression, and that was Johnson's time, being from the federal government and here to bring you electricity, well, that couldn't be done piecemeal. That required a national infrastructure. Now we've seen with the differential impact of the pandemic in a country that said, well, we're going to let every state kind of figure it out for themselves and every city figure it out for themselves. Now we're sitting here with 5% of the world's population and 25% of the COVID cases. So big problems like pandemics can only be solved on a national scale. And I think that should be the number one lesson from this, is that the federal government has a crucial role to play in a society. It's not an afterthought. It's not a necessary evil. The federal government is like the brain. All the rest of us are like the body, the arms, the heart, the legs. You need the arms, the heart, and the legs. No doubt about it. The brain wants to work with the arms and the hearts and the leg. But the arms and the hearts and the leg are of no use at all without a brain. And the brain is policy making, national policy making.
And LBJ really exemplified that, used the power of the federal government to do different things that would help more and more people. One of my favorite LBJ speeches ended with him saying, "We shall overcome."
I loved it. Yes.
That was phenomenal at that time, that the sitting president would say that, and it meant so much. A Texan, a person who, that it just resonated so much. What about you in terms of using that platform?
So I love that speech, and I believe that was his speech for the 65 Voting Rights Act, and seeing the grainy newsreels of it with everybody standing up, it was absolutely beautiful. And you could see, as mentioned, had he not met one-on-one over and over with Martin Luther King, I don't think he would have said that. But when you meet one-on-one with a person, a magical thing happens. Martin Luther King's mind and soul entered into LBJ, and parts of LBJ's mind and soul entered into Martin Luther King. So we have to engage with people one-on-one. And that was as much Martin Luther King saying we shall overcome, and John Lewis and all of the other leaders of the civil rights movement, as it was LBJ himself. I think my favorite speech, Carla, it's hard to pick, but I would probably pick the Great Society speech that he gave the year before in Michigan. Again, I was a little kid then, so I saw these on newsreels, but or on YouTube, to be frank. But what there was in that Great Society speech was a kind of a freshness to Johnson. He was outside. I think he felt more comfortable outside than indoors. There was a serenity to his visage. He seemed like, you know, this was his moment. And his message was that we can have a society where people are fed, are clothed, live in good homes, have the educational opportunities they want, are respected regardless of their race, color, creed, religion. We can have it all. That's thinking big. And then he began to say, you know, these are the particular steps that we need to take to have it all. So he had his head in the stars. To have a great society is to have one's head in the stars, but his feet were firmly planted on the ground at a commencement address in Michigan. And I think if you had to break down LBJ and said what was the one thing that was most important to him over everything else, he would say it was education. And I believe it's education. And I believe that all of us are a bit diminished because we have not fulfilled the aspirations of and the legacies of those who have gone before us to create a first-class education system in America. So many people, tens of millions of kids, are shortchanged in their education. And I would hope that the graduates of the schools of public affairs and other schools throughout the country today, if they have a number one priority, it should be that every single American, indeed everybody in the world, with the internet you can do it, should have a first-class education.
Now you mentioned the internet and the digital world, and you've been a creator and pioneer in that world. So what about the digital future? And how do you weave in that public good and the public service in that environment?
So digital is a blessing. It's a wonderful blessing. And it's an example of, we have this wonderful internet, not because people thought ahead of time that everybody wants to be able to watch a YouTube video to learn how to do what they don't know how to do. We built it sort of for defense-related purposes. It was funded by the Department of Defense. And as a result, I think everybody would agree the world is a better place. We all have more knowledge everywhere than we would have had before without the internet. So I believe that it's something that we should now make more and more available to everybody. We should make sure that the internet runs at faster and faster speeds. We should teach people to be critical learners, critical consumers of information. That's what school is about. Every child who goes to elementary school hears very quickly, first after they learn how to read, don't believe everything you read, right? I mean, yes. We learn how to read, then we learn don't believe everything you read. So these type of critical learning skills are imperative for us to spread throughout the world in order to have a greater future.
And I think that our conversation and bringing in what LBJ started, you can have your eyes up and be in the stars, but your feet on the ground. Absolutely. And that's why he matters today, because it seems like we're all going to have to do that and work together. So thank you, Martine.
My pleasure, Carla. It's such an honor to be with you and to have a chance to talk about LBJ's legacy, Justice Ginsburg, Congressman Lewis. Thank you for being with me.
Thanks.